All right, let's get right into it. We're about to unpack a really fascinating story about how one single government document completely flipped the script on how the world's biggest banks handled their data. And trust me, this isn't just a tech story. No, this is about power, it's about responsibility, and a massive, massive shift in who's held accountable when things go wrong.
So let's start with what seems like a simple question. Whose job is it really to make sure a bank's risk data is accurate? Is it the traders on the floor? The risk analysts? Maybe the tech team buried somewhere in the basement? For decades, the answer was surprisingly simple, and as regulators eventually figured out, dangerously wrong.
Yep, that was it. For the longest time, if the numbers were off, if a critical report was late, or if two different systems were telling two completely different stories, well, that was an IT problem. You just kick it downstairs, right? It was seen as a technical glitch, a database bug for the engineers to sort out. But that was all about to change. Big time.
To really get why this was such a huge deal, you have to understand what things looked like before. Let's just call it the fragmented past, because, well, that's exactly what it was.
Okay, so try to picture this. You've got a giant global bank. The credit risk department, they've got their own systems, their own databases. The team managing liquidity, they've got a totally separate setup. Operational risk? Yep, a third one. Each department was like its own little kingdom, with its own language, its own definitions, and its own version of the truth. And what happens when you have all these different kingdoms not talking to each other? You get a total data integrity crisis. The information was inconsistent. The credit team's numbers for a major client would be totally different from the trading team's numbers. It was untimely, meaning it could take days, even weeks to pull together a critical risk report. And worst of all, a lot of the time it was just plain inaccurate. This wasn't just messy bookkeeping, this was a disaster waiting to happen. And that brings us to the moment everything changed. The moment regulators had finally had enough and stepped in with a brand new rulebook, what we're calling the accountability mandate. This thing right here, the OCC's Corporate and Risk Governance Handbook, it was an absolute bombshell. It said, in no uncertain terms, that the quality of risk data was no longer IT's problem. From now on, it was the direct personal responsibility of the board of directors and the C-suite. The buck didn't just stop at the top, it started there. And here's the real kicker. The regulators didn't want to see some fancy policy document that would just gather dust on a shelf. Oh no. They demanded proof that good governance was literally built into the architecture of the bank's systems. You couldn't just say you had a process. You had to prove your technology enforced that process automatically. So now let's talk about how the stakes were raised, because this mandate didn't just change the rules. It completely redefined what it even meant for a data system to fail. This comparison just lays it all out, doesn't it? Before this handbook, a data problem was a technical issue. You delegate it to IT. It's an annoyance for sure, but not a 5-alarm fire. After the handbook, that exact same problem is now officially a government's failure. That's a failure of leadership owned directly by the board. The severity just went through the roof. And that's really the bottom line. Suddenly, conversations about database design, data validation, and reporting frameworks, they moved out of the server room and into the boardroom. Can you imagine? Executives who'd probably never even thought about data architecture were now personally on the hook for it. Which brings us to the lasting legacy of this whole thing. Creating this new reality you could call the boardroom's database. Because you see, this was never just a tech upgrade. You couldn't just go out and buy some new software and call it a day. This was a forced cultural change from the very top down. The leadership had to stop pointing fingers and start actually owning the story their data was telling them. They had to learn a whole new language, the language of data governance. So what does this new world actually look like? Well, it all starts with direct oversight from the board. It's built on that idea of architecture and practice, where the rules are literally coded into the systems. And it all flows down into enterprise-wide accountability, where absolutely everyone, from a brand new analyst all the way to the CEO, understands that they are a crucial part of one single unified data story. And what was the end game for this whole painful transformation? It was the pursuit of a single, unified, undeniable, golden source of truth for the entire organization. One database, one set of numbers that everybody could trust, from the trading floor to the risk committee, giving them a real, accurate picture of their risk at any moment. When you boil it all down, this regulatory shift uncovered a simple but really profound truth, one that goes way beyond banking. Getting your data right
isn't a job for the tech team. It's not a technical task. It's an act of leadership.